I'm Mark Tamminga, and I'm moderating today's program. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG and a leader of innovation programs there. I'm also a fellow with the College of Law Practice Management. The topic today is timely, at least I think it is, which is why I'm actually moderating it. Here are some factors. Working from home has distanced junior practitioners from the usual informal sources of work. Associates want more agency in the direction of their careers and are willing to and able to take their skills elsewhere to prove the point. The traditional prerogative of senior partners assigning work to whomever they please is proving to be suboptimal and sometimes high-handed. There are also clear and valid reasons to ensure proper representation and diversity on files. Put it all together and it's clear that this whole work allocation business in most law firms could benefit from some principled redesign and a more formal structure. This program presents a few distinct takes on why and how to do that. But before we get into it, I'd like to get a sense of where you, the audience, sit on this issue. Debbie's going to put up a poll, and I'll give you a few seconds to read the question and choose one of the 5 options. Debbie, could you do that for us?
Sure.
It's coming now as I fill time. There it is. I'll let this sit for about 30 seconds while people read the question. All right, Debbie, if you think you've got enough responses, can you throw a handy dandy result set up?
Alrighty.
And it'll tick along perhaps while we're watching. But that is kind of what I thought. I think this is new territory for a lot of large law firms. It's clearly something that makes a great deal of business sense. It's something that a lot of people are very interested in, and that's of course why we're here and the audience is as engaged as it is. Okay, so on to the presentation. The first speaker today is Lisa Kirby from Diversity Labs, who will discuss a central driver of formal as opposed to fully free market work allocation programming. And that's assuring diverse representation on the files the firm works on. Clients want it, law firms want it. Lisa explains how to get there. After that, we'll hear from Liz Blong on what she is doing at Wilson Sonsini as Director of Career Development. Her team manages the work allocation program for junior lawyers and acts as a high-touch matchmaker between senior lawyers, junior lawyers, and the work that needs to get done. Our final speaker is Ginevra Saylor, who will talk about the work allocation program that is just now getting off the ground at Gowling WLG in Canada. The plan is to use emerging software tools and new policies to transition quickly from the current free market system to a more methodical distribution of work. We'll give each of them about 15 minutes to set out what it is they're doing. And ideally, we'll have a minute or two of questions that are pertinent to that talk between each of these presentations. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some more interaction. Throughout the program, please feel free to enter questions in chat, and I'll try to gather them as they come along and put them out to our speakers toward the end. With that, I'll hand the screen over to our first speaker, Lisa Kirby of Diversity Labs. Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Nice to see some familiar names and faces and some new folks. So Mark might have built it up just a little too much. I'm not sure we have it all figured out at Diversity Lab, but I'll explain a little bit what we're trying and what we're currently piloting to sort of work towards a fair work allocation method. So quick anecdote, when I started at my large firm 20 plus years ago, we did have an assignment system. If you're on the phone, I'm putting quotes around the word system because there was a partner who was charged with doling out assignments to first-year associates. And so I believed in it. And we all, we had to fill out a form every week about our level of busyness and wait for, him to call us and let us know. And turned out me and only maybe like one or two other people in my class of, let's say 30, were really using the system. And it turned out the system was only for sort of like the dregs or the worst assignments or really, really huge, enormous assignments that a person just couldn't handle individually staffing using their favorite go-to people or people they happen to have some sort of connection with. And so everyone turned out that everyone else was, let's say they took the subway home or the train home with a partner, they'd get to talking and get them to staff them on a cool new matter, while some of us were sort of filling out the form, waiting at our desk and, following the procedure we had been explained. No one else was really doing that. Everyone else somehow had been clued in that the system wasn't really, that was just like a last resort kind of thing. And so it was a classic example of an unwritten rule that some people were clued into, and some people, it took some of us a bit longer to figure all that out. And so the issue with staffing, even when there are ostensible systems in place, is that it tends to typically rely on proximity, recency, and familiarity. So first of all, you tend to proximity, whoever your office is near, or, even in remote times, the people that pop up on your screen, the people you run into in the elevator. So a lot of it does happen to be sort of serendipitous. And recency, of course, is the same idea of familiarity too. And there's an affinity bias that comes into play, a cognitive bias, not a bias in the sense of prejudice, but the way your brain works is that people tend to gravitate towards those who remind us of ourselves. And the proximity bias is it's a brain shortcut. So if you had to right now think of a list of people that could help you out on an assignment or project, the order in which the names would appear in your head would be pretty closely correlated to the most, going from most recent to like least recent. And you're probably missing a lot of people too. We've all had this experience. I know recently I had to email a bunch of parents at my son's school for some reason. And I could literally, with COVID, you're not seeing people day to day. I could think of 3 or 4 names, basically of people that live right near me. I had to turn to our school directory. And of course, I, saw dozens of names there and was able to populate my list. It's just, your brain really isn't able to handle thinking objectively in every instance. So because staffing tends to go according to our brain's organic lines of who we know most, who we see most frequently, and who is nearest to us in whatever sense, physical or virtual, we designed an interrupter to create a more inclusive, a bias interrupter. So that's what we're calling it, to interrupt the way that these cognitive biases tend to play out, to interrupt these processes. And we are testing it as part of our Move the Needle Fund efforts, which we are working with 4 firms on, and Nixon Peabody is the firm that has taken the plunge with us and is testing out a new way of assigning and staffing matters. It's called the Mansfield Rule for Workflow. So building on the concepts of the Mansfield Rule, which are understood well at Nixon and at many firms, the idea of considering at least 30% underrepresented folks. In the original Mansfield, it's for leadership roles and promotions. In the Mansfield Rule for Workflow iteration, it's for staffing matters. And the idea is that having a metric like the 30% slows down your brain's thinking, and interrupts these cognitive biases. I'll mention the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I feel like I mentioned this in every one of my presentations for some reason or another, but it encompasses this idea, and this is sort of a 1-second version of that book, which is something like 800 pages. It's by Daniel Kahneman, and it's very eye-opening about how the brain works. So the 30% metric, and then we use a directory. So the combination of that reroutes your brain's processes, or that's sort of our hypothesis. It reroutes your brain to focus on first, who is available. no matter what location or how frequently you see them, as well as who wants and needs experience in the relevant area. So the associates, when they fill out their profiles for the MRW, as we call it, Advanced Field Rule for Workload Directory, they indicate the experience they already have and the experience that they would like to have. And that is something else that I think is a little bit harder to support in a traditional assignment system. There might be someone that has a list somewhere of everyone's goals and objectives, but it's probably a bit unlikely that in the traditional systems or in a free market system, that's necessarily being taken into account by anyone other than the associate themselves. And they might have a limited ability to get themselves involved in matters where that would support their career development needs. So through MRW, anyone wishing to staff a matter can just simply pull up a directory. You can search, of course, by practice area, office. There is you can check off whether you want to search for underrepresented associates or not. And then you can also look by their experience and desired experience. So it's just it's a very simple concept. There's not a lot of bells and whistles, especially in this pilot version where we just want to test whether something like this works in a basic way. So it may not sound it may not sound super exciting, but we think that the partners that have been testing it have found it really useful. It's useful for a number of reasons. One is that, especially for lateral associates or lateral partners, we're all in a market right now where firms have absorbed many multiples of the number of laterals that they typically hire within a usual year, and both partners and associates. So it's just harder to know who is out there and who's available. And couple that with the lack of, in most places, consistent in-person interaction and meetings. It's just hard to know, did someone just join the Denver office and it happens to have this skill, and you'd never really otherwise hear about them, or they wouldn't necessarily be on your radar. And the other idea is, of course, we're diversity lab, so we're promoting equity and inclusion in work practices. So the other point that I haven't emphasized as much is considering 30% underrepresented folks when staffing. So the idea is that typical systems, like the one that I encountered in my first firm, are rife with unwritten rules. And research and behavioral science shows that people who are members of an out group in any organization, there's an in group and an out group. So whoever's the member of the majority tends to be more clued in and tends to have more of the scoop on how everything works. And then people that are in the out group, for whatever reason, just tend to have less access to these unwritten rules. And they tend to follow the written rules. And that doesn't always work out if no one else is on the same page with that. So considering 30% underrepresented associates. And that's the idea. We've been testing it for several months. We've done some tweaks and iterations. Everything we do at Diversity Lab is, first of all, based on research and behavioral science, but we always iterate continuously. That's what we do with the original Mansfield rule. So we're about to launch our 6th iteration. So we're constantly raising the bar and adjusting to make sure things work effectively. Not just saying, here's our interrupter, that's it, take it or leave it. It's an ongoing process. So, and all that to say, we don't have a huge amount of data right now on the effectiveness. It's been less than a year. For some practice groups, it's only been a couple months since they started testing it. So we just need a more substantial volume of matters that have been staffed through it. But then our plan is, of course, to measure its effectiveness and determine whether teams are more inclusively staffed, whether associates feel they have more equal or equitable access to work opportunities, and partner satisfaction with the tool, just as a practical, way to staff things and consider inclusion and all of that. So sort of ambitious goals, but we're only part of the way through. And I think that's sort of the overview I wanted to present. I'm happy to answer questions or turn it to the next speaker, and feel free to send me a question in the chat too. Or if there's anything I left out, Mark.
I don't think so. I think there's so much to talk about here. And thank you for setting out what it is the Diversity Labs is doing. So anybody engaged in or thinking about a more formal work allocation program would do really well to get in touch with Diversity Labs, with Lisa, and understand how some of the work that they're doing could apply to the programs that you're building in-house. There's a great deal of sound principle and thought being put into it. Any questions? I'm going to quickly scan through the screens, and I am seeing nothing. There are a lot of people. We have 64 participants. I'll give it a 10 count in my head. I count quickly. So I think what we're going to do now is move on to Liz Blong, who is at Wilson Sonsini. Liz has been active in this. Oh, I think Gavin.
I did put a question in the chat.
I missed it. Okay. How do you, oh, so this is for you, Lisa. How do you measure whether 30% have been considered in staffing requests?
So that's a little bit of the honor system up front. Gavin, good question. We are asking, we are doing pulse surveys of the partners to ask whether they considered 30% in staffing their most recent matters. The app, I should have mentioned, or maybe I did, that this is an online platform that can also be used as like an app on your phone. So we call it the app, but the app is set up to permit that. And then we plan to measure at the end whether the diversity of teams at the firm has increased. But still, it's a little, that's not a definitive measure of whether 30% have been considered, because they might have been considered, but then ultimately not staffed for any number of reasons. So it's a little bit hard, but I would say that's the case with the original Mansfield rule as well. The firms in that case, in the legal departments, let us know whether they considered 30%, and they are tracking on their end, but some of it is a little bit on the honor system, but it's designed to sort of at least pave the way to more easily consider 30% than you could if you were just trying to think in your head.
Thanks, Lisa. Before moving back to Liz, I'm gonna go quick squeeze one more question in. Does the tool also show hours level of current volume of work for each associate option, from Kimberly Bell?
Yeah, great question. So some of the practice areas we're working with requested that feature. So we did recently add in hours for some of them. I should have mentioned, though, it does have an availability feature. So I forgot to mention that. So for most practice groups, the associates indicate their availability with a sort of green, yellow, and red system, which is pretty easily understood. Some of the practice groups wanted specific hours information from the most recent either month or week. So we're experimenting with that as well. It's a work in progress, but we didn't want it to be completely focused on hours, because it can be a little bit self-perpetuating if you are a member of an outgroup and you have fewer hours because you're being overlooked for a bunch of reasons. It might look like you're less in demand, or there's a lot that can, people read into your hours volume. It could be you have a lot of hours because you're not working efficiently. So, but anyway, we are experimenting with both hours or just a simple availability feature.
Okay, there are a couple of other questions that are popping up, but I'm going to move over to Liz, and we'll come back to Saylor, your question in a minute, or once we're at the end of the program. But I want to make sure everybody gets a chance. And now we're going to talk about what's happening in two firms. Liz will talk about what's going on at Wilson Sonsini. And with that, I'll hand it over to her.
Thanks, Mark. So I am going to talk to you about the work allocation and staffing model that we have at Wilson Sonsini that we started with our launch program. First, I'm going to talk about how it started, the benefits that we've seen, as well as where we're going from here. But first, like Lisa, I wanted to start with a little story, and this is a staffing story. And I hope that it will illustrate how important I believe staffing can be. So there's an associate that I meet with who has mentioned on multiple occasions how interested in transportation related companies he is. Now, this is not something that we think of when you think of Wilson Sonsini, ooh, transportation related companies. But he really loves to travel, he loves transportation. And I had a unique opportunity that came to me to staff a client team for a helicopter company. And I knew that this guy would be really excited for it. So I looked at his availability and I was really disappointed because he was super busy at the time. But I wanted to go ahead and reach out to him because I knew that this was the type of opportunity that would really excite him and you know, he would jump on if he could. And so I wanted to give him the right of first refusal. So I reached out to him, I explained the situation, and you know, he took a look at what was on his plate and he said, you know, Liz, I would love to do this, but I really can't take this on. You know, maybe in the future I can work with them, but right now I'm overwhelmed and just can't add something else. But the next day he emailed me and he still couldn't take on the transaction. But he sent me a picture of an aviation magazine that he subscribes to that was featuring the helicopter company. And he was so appreciative that I had taken the time to reach out to him, that I had thought of him for this opportunity. And it was simply because I'd had a conversation with him and knew this was an area that he was really interested in. And I think that this really shows, you know, how staffing can be so powerful in making people really appreciate their job and find meaning in what they're doing. And so my team really advocates on behalf of the associates in staffing requests. So prior to launch, like many law firms, Wilson's partners would staff associates directly on their matters, similar to what Lisa had described, you know, going to the associate next door or someone they had worked with previously. And so associates would work with a small group of partners and associates on whatever client matters that small group was servicing. And this could lead to associates being over or underutilized depending on how busy the group of attorneys that they were working with was at that time. And it could also pigeonhole an associate into working in a practice area that maybe they weren't that interested in, or that maybe didn't suit their personality. So in 2013, we established the launch program in our Palo Alto office. So all of our first and second year junior corporate and securities associates are in the launch program. We have about 35 to 40 associates in the program currently. In the launch program, the corporate associates are in a pooled group that's overseen by my team in the career development department. When they first start as fall associates, almost all of their staffing comes from our group. So partners or associates will reach out to us, say, I need a launch associate for this client team, and then we will look at the preferences and availability and other information to staff the associates. Eventually, as the junior associates start to build relationships with attorneys that they've been working with, our hope is that they will get repeat customers. They'll find the team of attorneys that they really enjoy working with. But our goal is to really make sure that they're getting a variety of experiences. They're working with a lot of different people because you never know who you're going to click with. And we want to make sure that they find those people. Let's see. So I would say the really unique feature about the program is that availability is only one factor that we consider when we're making staffing decisions. You know, of course, we have to look at availability, but we look at so much more. So my team meets one-on-one with each of the launch associates on a regular basis. It's either monthly or every other month, or sometimes in between, depending on if an associate reaches out wanting to chat between meetings. When we have these one-on-ones, we talk about their workload, their interests. So transportation related companies, we've had, you know, associates who are interested in video game companies. I have an associate who's originally from Wyoming. She's like, any company that's related to Wyoming, I'd love to be involved in. We have some associates who have prior experience. We have one associate who worked in South Africa for a time before coming to Wilson. So anything related to South Africa would be interesting to him. And, you know, we also talk to them about who they're working with, what they're working on, what they like, what they don't like, all of that information so that we can make informed staffing decisions. So for example, I mentioned the South Africa. situation. We actually have a client in South Africa who's working on something, and we were able to get that associate who had spent time in South Africa to work on that client. Similarly, we have an associate who's interested in video game companies, because of course everyone's interested in video game companies these days, and he was able to work on the direct listing for our client Roblox. You know, there's lots of examples like this, but we really believe that using an associate's outside interests as well as their prior experiences gives them more meaning and engages them in the work more fully. During these one-on-one discussions, we also coach the launchers on different work-related matters. You know, how do they manage their workload? How do they turn down work if they're too busy? How do they go and get more work? How do they approach somebody that they really want to work with and they haven't had an opportunity to do so yet? We also talk to them about how to plan for and take vacations, all of those things. So when people outside of a law firm ask me what I do, I say, I'm kind of like a guidance counselor for associates. You know, that's what my team does, is we work with them, especially in these early years, to introduce them to the practice of law. So the original goals of the program, which I think we've achieved, were to provide a more even work allocation among the juniors. You know, before launch, juniors would join, and like I said, if their small group was really busy, then they got really busy. If their small group wasn't very busy, they weren't busy. Similarly, you know, there are some associates who just ramp up very quickly. You know, they're maybe extroverted, they walk around, they knock on doors, they reach out to people. And then there's the other group that sits in their office and fills out their form like Lisa did and waits for people to come, you know, because that's what they've been told they're supposed to do. And so we're trying to avoid those situations. We really want to try and look at across the class, who needs work, what are their interests, how can we advocate for them to get some opportunities? And I think that's actually one of the great things that we have. I sort of think of it as a little bit like a free market system, because people can take on whatever they want, but with guardrails, because we will step in and say, no, we should actually have this person work on this matter. Or, you know, we sort of, we step in when we need to help with the staffing. Another goal was to help the juniors to identify the group of attorneys that they really like to work with. Associates joining right after law school have absolutely no idea what it's like when they're a junior associate. You know, the summer associate program gives them a glimpse into what it will be like, but it really doesn't give them a good taste of what they should expect. And so we encourage through the staffing model for them to have a variety of experiences and to work with a variety of people. So we look at who they've been working with and we say, you know, we know that you really love working with Mark, but we really think that you should branch out a little bit because you're going to learn different things from each person that you work with. And so we encourage them to expand. I've actually had associates who join Wilson, you know, the startup law firm, to work with startups. And they're like, I want to work with startups. Startups are so cool. All of my friends from college work with startups. And so we staff them on a couple of startup things. And then they come and they say, Liz, I don't want to work on any more startups like those. They have weird questions, you know, the cadence of the work is difficult. You know, I'd like to try something else. And that's what we're here for, is to help them pivot and to try new things. Another benefit of the program is that because we meet so often with the associates, we can identify those associates pretty early on who are having difficulty integrating into our practice. And we can help them and we can guide them to get them on the road to success. Let me see. We're also able to work with the professional development department to suggest additional training classes if we're hearing certain feedback. My team also does informal trainings for the associates. Like last week, they did a session on effective email communication. You know, we went through a bunch of emails, you know, just communicating with their teams that were good and, you know, how to make those communications better. There are some downsides to the program. We've had some launchers who fail to take control over their careers and instead act passively, sort of expecting our team to funnel work to them. And so we really want them to take charge of their careers and, you know, start reaching out to the teams that they've enjoyed working with to ask for more opportunities, you know, to really, you know, try and drive a lot of career development opportunities themselves. And that's what we do on my team is, you know, we coach them through those things. And also because they work with so many different attorneys, taking time off can be a challenge. So we do have to coach them on how to ask for and take their vacation, and how to work with their teams. We help them to find vacation coverage, but also just communicating with their teams can be difficult. And because the launchers also work with so many different attorneys, it can be difficult for them to just manage competing expectations. And so we really explain to them that they need to have clear communication, they need to be transparent on what's on their plate with their teams, and really just have discuss their workload with their supervisory attorneys. So the first launchers in the program are now senior associates, they're 9th years. And so we've been able to kind of see, the benefits of the program over the years. And because these associates have worked with such a large group of attorneys as juniors, they have a wider network with whom they've worked. And that's really a great advantage now that they're getting closer to partnership. They also have a better understanding of the different types of general corporate work. So I'm talking startups and public companies and corporate governance and M&A and capital markets, because they all tried out all of these things as junior associates. I think they have less of a grass is greener mentality as a mid-level or a senior associate, because they've tried it all and they chose the particular practice area that they're focusing on because they liked that the best. And then one really surprising benefit that I've noticed recently is that the graduates of the launch program tend to be better managers of the junior associates. And I think it's because they were exposed to so many different management styles that they were able to pick and choose the good things that they saw and try and model those with the junior associates now. Because the program has been so well received, we started a similar program in San Francisco this year for our general corporate and M&A associates. And outside of the junior associates in the Bay Area, my team provides supportive staffing for associates at all levels in the corporate group. And I like to call it supportive staffing because the partners are still in charge of staffing their matters, but they can reach out to my team in certain situations, and they do very frequently when they want to work with someone new. Maybe they have a new client and they want to build up a very broad team that comes from across the firm. And if their current associates in their small group don't have availability, then they reach out to my team looking for assistance from someone outside their group. And so again, we consider the client, the work that needs to be done, the associate interests, skills, and experience, and then we make staffing suggestions, and then we help to connect the partner with the associate. So again, similar to the launch program, in order to make the best staffing suggestions, we meet periodically with the associates at all levels to discuss their interests, their goals, their ambitions, all of those things, so that we can then incorporate that into our staffing suggestions. So for example, a senior associate in Seattle now works with a Bay Area partner on multiple startup clients, simply because I said, hey, this person in Seattle has some availability and this is what she really likes to work on. And they hit it off, and now she works with this partner quite a bit. Another example is we have a lateral associate in the DC office, who, again, like Lisa mentioned, lateral associates come on, they don't know who to reach out to. A partner in the Bay Area needed someone to jump on a transaction. This lateral associate had the experience from her prior firm. I had just spoken to her, and I said, hey, can you work on this? And she was able to work on a San Francisco technology client's transaction that she normally wouldn't have been thought of because she sits in the DC office. And she was super excited for that. And so we've been doing this supportive staffing model for over 3 years, but during the pandemic, it's gotten a lot of traction and people are really trying to use it more. And so we've expanded it to our technology and commercial licensing group. They're starting to use a similar model, as well as our M&A group. And hopefully we'd like to expand it firm-wide so that associates have these opportunities across the firm. So that's really just my overview into how we're doing it at Wilson Sonsini, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was a lot of information.
But it also shows the remarkable amount of involvement that you have with your entire group. First question comes up, and I direct your attention to the chat. Kat Moon at Vanderbilt has an interesting program that they're doing called Design Your Delta. If you could read that, it's quite interesting. We have a question from Julie Prester. How large is your staff to be able to manage the work for 40 associates, Liz?
So I have 2 associates that work with the launch, or 2 associates, 2 specialists who work with my launchers as well as myself. And then I also have a career development manager who recently joined, who's working with all of the corporate associates outside of launch. I'm hiring another manager to help as well. And then I have somebody who's working with our technology and commercial licensing group too.
All right. Are there other questions? But this is so full of new experience. Oh, here's one from Bridget Schuster. How can we set up a similar system for a smaller firm? They have about 60 attorneys.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do the launch program entirely by myself. And that, was about 40 associates. I think, what I have seen is as the mid-levels get more senior, you don't have to have as frequent of conversations, maybe quarterly or, every 6 months. But for the junior associates, I think more frequent conversations, because they really want to talk through things, and just advocating on their behalf is really important. And again, not all staffing requests come through my team. I would say a large number of them do for the launchers, but beyond that, it's really, the supportive staffing model.
Okay, and then the last question for this session, and we'll defer other questions till after, is how do you ask associates for their work preferences and their frequency?
Yeah, I mean, we have one-on-one conversations and we ask them what they like and what they don't like. We talk about why they like things and why they don't like things, so that we can dig in. Was it the team? Was it the transaction? What was, the reason for their preference? We also have an availability tool that we use on a weekly basis, and the associates can put into that, things that they are looking for, actively would like to get staffed on. And that also helps us with that information.
Okay, there's a question from Dennis that I'd like to defer to after the fact. So Dennis Kennedy, if you could just hang on with that. I'd like to move over to Ginevra Saylor, who is the director of innovation programs at Gowling WLG in Toronto. And so for the next 15 minutes, the floor is Ginevra's.
Thanks, Mark. First, luckily, I talk very fast when I want to. So I'm going to try to cover our entire project in 10 minutes. Mark's asked me to talk about our journey, and the journey for me began about 15 or 20 years ago, I think, where I just thought it would be great to remove some of the subjectivity, proximity, and just sheer luck that really seemed to be involved in how young associates, how their careers shape out for them. So I talked about it a lot, but there was very little interest at the time. And the one thing I've learned in this kind of work that I've been doing now is every good idea has its day, and you just have to wait. And so many, many years later, and a couple firms later, my idea has its day. And now it's not only my idea, it's really something that has developed through many firms experiencing this very issue. So I'll start with our journey and try to keep it very quick and to the point. First, I'll do the timeline. We started our project in the spring of 2021. Our first pilot is planned for the spring of 2022, and we expect to be fully 100% implemented with everyone using it and everything going perfectly by the spring of 2023. So that's our plan. Our goal is to become more intentional about work allocation. And what we want to do is make sure pretty much everything that has been talked about so far, that opportunities can be shared more equitably across all associates, and that everyone has an opportunity to succeed at the firm. But equally important to succeeding at our firm, we also want to make sure that they have a really big hand to play in the direction their career takes. And we know very well that may end up at another firm, but the goal is to really let people have a say, play a real part in developing their own careers. So that's our goal, a big part of it. I'm going to talk about just a couple of the reasons why we're doing it. And as I talk about the whys, I'll be able to lead in the benefits we expect to reap from it. And again, this isn't everything, but just a couple of highlights. So obviously, the top goal is to make sure that work is distributed more equitably. We know that it's not currently for any number of reasons. And so we want to make sure that those opportunities for skills development happen, that people have the opportunity to expand their relationships and, of course, advance their careers. We have a really strong sense that this is going to help us both recruit excellent new lawyers and also retain really great lawyers to stay with us for the long haul. We also want greater transparency into the kinds of work opportunities that are available, and of course, where they're going. And we want to reduce, and actually we want to eliminate, I know that's a big goal, but that is the goal, eliminate any kind of bias. Conscious bias probably, hopefully, isn't happening that much or at all. But we know unconscious bias plays a big part. Lisa very well articulated the problems with unconscious bias and the effect they can have on work allocation. And so we are trying to eliminate that. So that's our diversity goal. And we think it will create a much better pipeline of really diverse candidates for partnership and leadership roles in our firm. We also want to align availability with assignments. And what we're looking to do is have associates with balance. We don't want some associates extremely overworked while others are searching for opportunities to do work. We know that, especially in busy times, the associates who, for whatever reason, are the go-to associates can really suffer from burnout. And we want to really eradicate that. People should have balanced workloads, and we're hoping this will help that. Something that Liz talked about a lot was balancing not only skills to available work, but also interests. And so we are also interested in achieving that. And again, that goes to having a say in your career, control over your career, but also building ultimately career satisfaction. And we know a lot of lawyers do not have career satisfaction, so we're hoping this will help with that. And then finally, we want to track how we're doing. We want to be able to see if we are getting better at this and report on it. And the whole goal there is to get into that virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. So those are some of the whys. And now I'm going to talk about the what we're doing. And we're going to seem quite different from Wilson Sonsini, who took a very human approach, which I think is fantastic. But ours is tech-driven. I'm going to come out and say we are taking a hardcore tech-driven approach to this. We have a very tight 3-person team working on this, a tech person, our head of talent, and me. And so we are really hoping that the technology can help us really fast track into a better position. So what we're doing is replacing our current system, and I should say systems, because every office does things differently now. And even within offices, some of the practice groups do things differently. So there is no system. We're going to replace that with a work allocation program, which I just noticed has a really unfortunate acronym. But it is going to govern all work that goes to articling students. I know you don't have them in the US. Just think of them as interns who work for maybe 9 months to a year. And then first through second year associates, all of them. It's going to cover any work assignments that anyone gives, from the most senior partner, all partners, council, senior associates. And finally, it's going to cover all offices. So now I will talk about what we're going to do. So the technology, we spent a long time evaluating different platforms, and I'm proud to say we're going with a newcomer, and we're really excited about it. This is how we are designing our program using the technology. So anyone who wants to assign work to an articling student or anyone up to a third year associate must put that assignment into the system. So the assigning lawyer goes into the system and describes the nature of the work, the skills that are needed that you already have to complete the work, when the work will start, and if you know a deadline, the deadline, and an estimate of the amount of hours that the work should take. So that's the first step. Next step, the lawyer has 2 options. The lawyer can put it out for, I'm going to call it an open bid, which means, you know what? I don't care who takes it. Let the associates pick it if they're interested. And so if that's what happens, it goes on to a dashboard that all of the associates in that grouping would see. So I mean, articling students to 3 years. And whoever wants it picks up the job. There is something that is built in that if it doesn't get picked up right away, the lawyer's notified, so he's not sitting around, he or she, waiting. We don't anticipate that'll happen that often. What we expect will happen more often is the second option, which is to request an associate from the system. And now I'm going to get really fuzzy because I'm not the hardcore tech person, but an algorithm, a very intelligent, probably more so than me, algorithm is going to then look for the best match. And it's going to base that on a couple of factors. One is availability. One is the skills that you've got to have to take on the work. And then the other is skills that are needed. And then other factors like interests and things like that are also built into it. It selects and assigns the work, and away they go. Now, we probably are going to build one little thing into it, which is an override, because there may be a really good reason in certain circumstances where the lawyer assigning the work gets the name and says, can't use that person. and it may be a legitimate reason. If that's the case, they override it and they see the list of associates and then they pick one. Now, if that happens, the human being, we do have a human being involved in this at some point. The work allocation program manager is immediately alerted and keeps track of all of those, looks at the situation, will likely talk to the lawyer to find out why it happened. And if it's happening too often, then we'll take action. Okay, so I want to go back to just a couple points. When it looks for availability, it isn't doing it on, I'm the associate and I said I have availability. It's looking at objective factors. So since all the work is going in, it sees this wonderful algorithm, sees how much work everybody is doing and when they're going to be handing in assignments and their availability with more, all of that. Lawyers, associates will also put in vacations, things like that. So it's going to look at all of that. In time, when we connect it to our billing system through an integration, much later in the future, it will also factor that in. Okay, Mark just gave me the notice. I knew I'd go over. Same with skills that I have and want. All the associates will have profiles that they can build in there, but there will also be objective factors like our competencies and benchmarks that will be loaded into it. So I'm going to skip our obstacles because I'm sure you all know what some of those are going to be. We're doing a staged pilot. So we're going to add groups. We're going to start and every 3 months add more. And that's why it's going to take a while. And then just a couple of things that we think are going to be critical to our success. We've made a really solid communications plan that we plan to stick to. We're going to have continual education throughout. A solid design, build, and performance, we hope, from the wonderful technology we're using, training and support, and then, of course, celebrating and promoting all of our successes. That's it.
That's a lot.
Sorry.
No, it's you got a lot in, and I'm glad you did, because it's an ambitious program that is now in the offing. There are a number of questions that have built up, and we have 5 minutes to go. There's no hard stop at noon, but I know people will have to drop off. But I wanted to go back to a Dennis Kennedy question. He's actually put 2 up for us, but I'm going to put this to the panel. I think this is kind of an interesting one because it does speak to incentives. How much are corporate law department clients and GCs driving this? That's the first part. And then the second is, are you using this as part of the firm's pitch presentation for outside panel selection? So I just open that up to the 3 of you and just make this a quick little 1-minute roundtable.
Well, since I'm unmuted, I'll start. I would say it's not really being driven externally. I think it's something we've wanted to do internally, but we are very conscious of our corporate clients wanting us to create diverse matter teams. And so that definitely is part of the driver behind the whole diversity side of it.
Lisa?
And the other question was
the pitch part.
Yeah, too soon. I'm sure we will, but we're not yet.
Maybe Lisa has something on that.
I was just going to say that as I think that outside counsel become increasingly interested, legal departments become increasingly interested in their outside counsel's diversity and inclusion efforts and the way that they're structuring and offering equal opportunities. They're sort of looking below just the numbers and mere representation to really dig into opportunities I don't know that I would say they're definitely driving this, but I think that it is a great selling point for firms that are so fully committed to this, like Gowling's and WSGR and the others, Nixon, that is testing it with us in order to promote their diversity and inclusion goals. It shows a really deep commitment because it's not showy like promotions, which is still really important. It's really getting into the weeds of sort of restructuring the whole way the firm operates.
Yeah, and I would just add that I don't think that we use this as a part of the firm's pitch materials, but we do have partners who will reach out asking for suggestions for associates to include on teams when they're going for a pitch. And that's when we can really advocate for associates that they might not otherwise think of immediately.
Right. And clearly, once this becomes a mature component of law firm operations, it will be definitely part of the pitches. Dennis Kennedy has also observed that when he was at MasterCard, he would have loved to have seen these kinds of things as part of the pitch. Another question that comes up is whether or not, is how, and this speaks to the obstacles, Ginevra, you were about to get into, is what kind of incentives or what do you see are the consequences for partners who either use the system or being sort of partners decide not to?
Well, what I was going to say when talking about the obstacles, and I'll be really quick here, is we took all of the obstacles, including that one, and said, okay, how much can we build into our system to prevent that from happening? And so we have an enforcement mechanism built in. We have the monitoring, and that's where that work allocation manager comes in to play. People will have to answer for their actions if they try to go outside the system. And I think that would be an uncomfortable conversation if you have to have it too frequently. So hopefully that will help. That's not our only mitigation strategy, but a big part of it.
Liz, do you have a lot of buy-in?
We do. I mean, I think because we've had it for so long and people are used to it, we had some partners who were really not interested in the launch program when it first started. And I was talking to one of them last year and he said, well, this is the beauty of the launch program. And I was like, okay, we've totally, bought you in. And I think, the partners see the value in spreading their work around and getting to know associates. If an associate that they always work with then decides to leave, they're left high and dry and they have to start over with someone new. And so if they have a wider and deeper bench to work on their matters, it's to their benefit as well.
Lisa, what Diversity Labs is doing, you mentioned Nixon Peabody. Are you finding a lot of interest in the program?
We are, it's a change. And so unlike with Liz's program, it is brand new to a lot of these partners. And so a lot of them have enthusiastically embraced it and found it to be extremely helpful. But, there's always a few people that are a little slower to adapt to a new technology and new process. So yeah, I'd say there's a good amount of interest, but as I mentioned, once we have a solid several months of testing, we'll be able to really get a better read on who is using it, how many people, and if they're not, why not. But so far, so good.
All right, and again, I would direct everybody's attention to the chat. Norm Mulak has come up with, or has put out quite an interesting statement about the think tank exercise he was part of, looking at some of the real benefits that come from this. We are at 101. And so that really is the formal end of the program. We can continue on with the conversation if questions pop up. And I'll give it a few more seconds. And while we wait, in the event someone does have a question for our panelists, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and joining in this. I find it has confirmed my interest in the topic even more. And I'd like to thank Ginevra and Liz and Lisa for putting their efforts in and joining us for this, and for Debbie for coordinating it with the college. And would invite you to go to the college's website and see other programs. We're putting together these 1-hour sessions available to everybody once every few months or so. So with that, I think I'm getting lots of thumbs up and encouraging comments, which I believe are absolutely fairly put to our panelists, and thank them again. And that closes our program. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.